The United States stock market, as I said, has reached record highs today, topping the 30,000 mark for the first time. The Dow Jones landmark follows news the US General Services Administration. It's acknowledging Joe Biden as the winner of the presidential election, and preparation is now underway for the end of President Trump's administration.
I just want to congratulate everybody. The stock market, Dow Jones Industrial Average, just hit 30,000, which is the highest in history. We've never broken 30,000, and that's just despite everything that's taken place with the pandemic.
Right, let's get into joining me now, the Australian's economics editor, Adam Creighton. Adam, it's hot in Melbourne. My head's sort of like, you know, here and there and everywhere else. Herald Sun's Terry McCrann in Melbourne. It's been very warm today, hasn't it, Terry? Adam, what do we make of this news? The Dow Jones, 30,000 for the first time. What's it all mean?
Well, I suppose on the one hand, it's a good thing because the people that hold stocks are wealthier, but you've got to wonder whether the values of these companies are actually reflecting the fundamentals, their future revenue streams. I think, you know, probably it's more likely, you know, the fact that the US Federal Reserve is buying something like, you know, 130 billion US dollars worth of securities every single month. And this liquidity is filtering through the financial system around the world. It's pumping up asset prices in the US, in Europe, and even in Australia, of course, when you've got, you know, we're seeing house prices go up at the same time as rents are falling. So it's almost as if traditional economics is being turned on its head.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Joe Biden today, too, named former US Secretary of State, I met him a number of times, John Kerry, as his special presidential envoy for climate change, as he pledges to rejoin the US to the Paris Agreement, Terry. Well, Malcolm Turnbull, he's leapt on this appointment as an opportunity to criticise the Morrison government, saying in the papers today that he's announced John Kerry, who is a real climate action evangelist with huge global credibility. He'll be the new climate czar, so Australia has to get on board, so says Turnbull. Will this happen? This is all about the net zero emissions by 2050 target, Terry.
Well, I think the Americans have to worry more about John Kerry becoming their climate czar, because the two big things that President Trump delivered was to make the US energy independent. It finally broke the nexus with particularly Saudi Arabia, but the OPEC countries generally, because of all that fracking which gave the oil supply that America needed. But secondly, the US has been the outstanding performer in terms of cutting carbon dioxide emissions, precisely because it's moved from coal to gas, which is less carbon intensive. So the reality will be, if Joe Biden and John Kerry go down the path of stopping the fracking taking place in the US, which Joe Biden in his more lucid moments has indicated he would, you'll in fact see the two things being reversed. And so America will become once again, quote unquote, the climate criminal that Donald Trump is supposed to be responsible for. But secondly, obviously, it'll drive up oil prices and it'll make for a bad economic outcome globally.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Malcolm Turnbull, too, is pretty critical of Donald Trump now. Wasn't so critical at the time. I want to go to the Victorian budget. Net debt levels will rise and rise to $155 billion over the next 3 years in the state. More than 28% of the total annual economic output in Victoria. Adam, this is a lot of debt.
Yeah, look, it certainly is. I think we're kind of in this new era now of what I've called COVID-nomics, is where kind of money doesn't matter and everything's governed by feelings. And I think we're seeing this across all of the states. They're taking advantage of the fact that the Reserve Bank is creating money and is buying their bonds. So the cost of state debt is very cheap. And so from the point of view of state governments, it makes sense to borrow a great deal. Why not? But yeah, the growth in debt, not just Victoria. We saw in New South Wales last week, forecast debt from 20 billion to 100 billion. And now the same in Victoria. I'm sure we're going to see the same thing next week in Queensland as well. Look, for the time being, it seems fine. Interest rates are low, but, you can't help but think that at some point there's going to be some cost to this, maybe 10, 15 years down the road.
There's
Peter,
always a reckoning, Terry McCrann. Terry McCrann, there is always a reckoning. Debt, it doesn't go away.
I was just going to add to that. We've also got, don't forget, the big daddy of them all in Canberra, which is heading for $1 trillion of net debt. And we've got the three state governments that Adam mentioned adding at least $350 billion to that. But who knew that money doesn't matter anymore, as Adam indicated? You can borrow as much as you want at 1 to 2%. I think it's telling us, I mean, I would make some positive comment about the state debt on this basis, that a large part of it is actually being spent on infrastructure. In fact, in the case of New South Wales, all the $100 billion is funding infrastructure, maybe not directly, but in terms of debt versus infrastructure. You're actually getting assets out of that process. That's not quite the same at the federal level. And most of the federal debt is funding recurrent expenditure. You know, defence, social work.
Yeah, that is the concern. That is the concern. But of course, there's one thing to spend on infrastructure, but there's another thing to spend efficiently on infrastructure.
Sure.
We know that the rail crossings in Victoria, the cost for those, Adam, they have trebled. They have trebled the cost for those. And a lot of the road projects in Victoria, there's been a massive blowout. And the report to the Parliament, you know, the accounting of their spend every year that's supposed to be there in the budget. There's a special book that deals with, you know, how are the projects tracking against what we were told they would cost and what they end up costing. Well, they're not doing that anymore. They're not going to hand that report out. This is the problem.
You know, you're right, Peter, to stress the spending side. I was just going to quickly say the problem is also in just the overreach of state governments. There are so many new programs that they can't possibly have been assessed properly. There's new wage subsidies, there's free kindergarten, there's free TAFE courses, everything's suddenly free, and quite often the policies conflict with federal government policies. So it's just, the states are just, the size of the budget papers, if you like, are just getting far too large. They used to be very slim documents, and now, they're almost as large as the federal budget.
And public sector wages too. That wage bill in Victoria, Terry, is extraordinary.
Well, exactly. I mean, the Victorian budget is very different to the New South Wales budget. As I said, New South Wales budget is mostly infrastructure spending in terms of the debt. Victoria is, as Adam indicated, a lot of recurrent expenditure. The state, handing out money left, right and centre, and in particular with the public sector wage bill going up 10%, nearly 10% this financial year. Now, there are promises about it being hauled back in the out years, but the bottom line is that we're going to get to 2024 and we're going to have these huge debts, which will be there, whatever happens, at least, and the promise that we may then be actually getting back to some sort of sanity in budgets, and that's both at the federal level and the state level.
The wages of public servants by 2024, Adam, and I know you watch this stuff closely, $37 billion in Victoria. $37 billion. Now, if they were as good as the public servants in New South Wales, keeping COVID out and, keeping the state open, I might be happy to pay it, but not in Victoria.
No, look, that's right. I mean, just in 1 year, the public sector wage bill is up 9.5%, and then the forecast is wages will continue to go up about 3.5%, I think, per year for the rest of the forward estimates. But we know private sector wages nationally are barely increasing at all. So I think it's pretty outrageous use of public funds. There's not enough scrutiny, I think, of the upper echelons of state governments. There's too much focus on federal, but you often find the waste and the absurd salaries are just as bad, if not worse, at the state level.
Yeah, I'd love to have a national sort of body of people like you two and a whole bunch of accountants, forensic accountants, putting out their report on the state budgets, because I don't believe that there's the calibre in the state treasuries or the honesty or indeed the reporting of it by the media. That would be something else, because we're all paying for it. Anyway, got to leave it there, gentlemen. Terry McCrann, Adam Creighton, thank you as always.
Peter.
Thanks, Peter.